Hey everyone, it's Mike with LPD Epoxy Designs. I was pretty excited when I learned Leggari Products was coming out with their own casting epoxy, as I've known the company to primarily focus on countertop and flooring epoxies. Because Leggari Products is based out of Tri-Cities, Washington, it made it convenient as I could just pick it up instead of waiting for my order to arrive by shipping. I picked up this 3-gallon casting epoxy set, which came with two 1-gallon Part A's and 1-gallon Part B. The associate I spoke with said they had tested it and it was capable of pours up to 6 inches, which seemed pretty wild to me. About the only instructions I found in the box was what came written on the bottles themselves. Stir before use and mix 2 parts A to 1 part B. I called and spoke with a customer service associate who said the mixing process and application process were the same as their countertop epoxies. The pigment I went with on this pour was the West System 502-8 black pigment. As for the mixing process, I'll leave a link in the description for both the Leggari Products Casting Epoxy as well as the mixing instructions for their countertop epoxy. I do feel the instructions for the countertop epoxy are pretty thorough, but additional mixing time seems to be the standard with the other casting epoxies I've used in the past. I spaced out the pigment addition to make sure I had the right pigmented look I was going for on this specific table. I picked up these reclaimed black walnut slabs from Basin Works, which is located near Othello, Washington. I really enjoyed working with this company as their locally acquired wood is kiln dried, flattened, and just basically ready to go. Before mixing the casting epoxy, I started with sealing the edges with clear countertop epoxy and waited until it cured before mixing and pouring the casting epoxy itself. Per the Leggari Products website, the casting epoxy has amazing working time, UV resistant, no VOCs, and does indeed indicate it's capable of up to 6-inch pours. For this pour, I didn't want to press my luck and went with a 1.5 inch for my depth. It did self-level pretty well and had a nice low viscosity, which boded well with the small cracks and seams I had to fill. I noticed right away a lot of micro bubbles throughout the pour itself, which isn't uncommon with these types of deep pours. Leggari Products is a big promoter of not using heat or blow torching to eliminate bubbles. Instead, they encourage the use of denatured alcohol sprayed over the pour itself, which helps eliminate those bubbles. About 2 hours after the pour, the epoxy itself had leveled pretty nicely, but I could still see my little micro bubble buddies hanging out waiting to say hi. After 24 hours, the epoxy was starting to gel and tack up. I'm sure this initial setup would have been faster if my shop was a little warmer. Since the pour was not very deep, it was fully cured in about 5 days, at which point I removed the table from the mold. I took the slab to my friends at Basin Works, where for a fair price they flattened it and sanded it to 120 grit, which saved me tons of work time. As you can see, these micro bubbles reared their ugly head and continued to do so during the sanding process as they'd fill up with micro dust during the finishing stages and just provided loads of fun for me later on trying to get it out. To address the small cracks, voids, and imperfections, I tried out Super Clear's Super CA Glue with its accelerator spray. It's described as a flexible and rubber toughened CA glue. I haven't historically been a fan of black CA glue as I feel it doesn't typically blend well with pigmented epoxy. It has a different sheen in a lot of circumstances. It has the consistency of a medium thick CA glue, and to be honest, I loved using Super Clear's Super CA glue and was almost looking forward to finding a void or something to be filled. I promise I'm not sponsored by Super Clear, and I did pay for this with my own money. Just look at how many followers I have on this channel if you don't believe me. Once I finished battling my micro bubble buddies, I routed a small chamfer bottom edge and a 1/8 inch round over for the top. This is a view of the table before applying the finishing coat. Aside from the micro bubble issues and no instructions in the box, I was so far pretty happy with the Leggari Products Casting Epoxy performance. For the finishing coat, I went with my go-to for these types of tables, which is the Rubio Monocoat Oil plus 2C, which mixes at a 3-to-1 ratio. I typically apply it with a plastic or rubber trowel, but I tried out this 6-inch palm polisher with terry cloth. I had to mix up a second batch of Rubio Monocoat, as I believe a lot of the first batch was absorbed in the terry cloth itself, but the application went pretty smooth. I had my son give me a hand, but I think he had more fun with the polisher itself. After applying Rubio Monocoat, I gave it about 10 minutes to soak before removing the excess with shop towels. Here's a look shortly after applying Rubio Monocoat Oil plus 2C. For the bottom of this table, I had a little fun as I coated it with clear countertop epoxy before routering the table leg inlays. For the table legs, I picked up these legs from Flowy Line Design, which offers custom, edgy, and modern table legs. As for my final thoughts on Leggari Products Casting Epoxy, aside from the issues I covered earlier, it's difficult for me to say I would or wouldn't use it again in a table, as this was my first introduction to their newly launched casting epoxy. I love the convenience of having the company nearby to save on shipping, plus the associates I've had the chance to meet are super nice, friendly, and helpful. Nonetheless, the table turned out beautiful, and I'll now turn my attention on finding a new home for it. Thanks for watching. Stay stoked.